Thank you. Yeah, welcome everyone. I can't see you, so I'm gonna rely on Jamie. So if there's any questions, save them till the end, unless it's something you'd like to be clarified mid-talk, then yeah, feel free to ask Jamie and then he'll raise it with me. So yeah, no ban, no problem, or no problem that can't be solved. Thought I'd start with a photo really of our farm. So we farm in Snowdonia or in Eryri, which are on the south slopes of Snowdon up to about 19,000 feet. And I had the perfect weather between Christmas and New Year's to go out and take photos of our outwintering heifers here. Especially for this webinar, because I was like, oh, there's a big snow dump, I need photos. So they will be featuring quite heavily today. Right, so yeah, just as a background for myself, yeah, we farm in Snowdonia, so we've got some blue-grey heifers here, and we've got Welsh mounted sheep. Previously, I've been working in a feed company, and I've also done a PhD at Harper Adams in dairy nutrition. So that's over 10 years now of a background in ruminant nutrition. So today I'll be covering what is energy, the energy requirements of cattle, energy requirements of sheep, how you can calculate the energy requirements of your stock, go over a bit of winter stockpiling, how we can improve livestock energy efficiency, and then the benefits of outwintering. So what is energy? So I'm going to start right at the start, right at the very beginning. So energy is what allows life to move, breathe, reproduce, and function. It powers everything from basic maintenance like digestion and keeping warm to active processes like growth and movement. If we've got insufficient energy, or if our animals have got insufficient energy, it will impact animal productivity. So we'll have lower growth rates, lower milk yield, compromised fertility, and compromised immune system. So when I'm thinking about energy, how do we measure it? So we measure energy in megajoules. So 1 megajoules is the equivalent of about 239 calories. And as humans, we are probably more familiar with calories. If you've ever been on a diet, they might tell you to count your calories. But in animal nutrition, we don't really talk about calories. We talk about megajoules. So if we're thinking of gross energy, so this is the total amount of energy contained within a feed, but it's not all digestible. So we have energy losses. So we have losses to start with in, like fecal energy. So what you've then got left is what's actually digestible out of that energy. And every feed source has got a different level of digestible energy within it. On a scale, on one side, you've got straw, which is about 45% digestibility. And then on the other side, we've got the cereals, such as wheat, maize, oats, that might be closer to 75-85% digestibility. From that, with our further losses in terms of urine and methane, and then what you've got left then is metabolizable energy, ME we often abbreviate it to, and it's measured in, if you've ever seen a forage analysis, you will see it using the units megajoules per kilogram of dry matter. In terms of what an animal requires, it's megajoules per day. Further on from that then, you do lose some energy in heat loss in the Krebs cycle. So you might remember this from, was it biology, GCSEs or A levels? But obviously when an animal eats or consumes energy, they then need to convert it to ATP. So that's within the Krebs cycle. So you do lose a little bit of energy there in heat loss. So hopefully you're all with me there. So I've mentioned, kilogram dry matter. So I thought I would quickly just go over some forage analysis and why we talk in dry matter forms. So on the left-hand side, I've got an silage analysis. And first line is dry matter, so it's 43.9% dry matter, quite a dry silage in a way. So that means that there is, 100 minus 43.9 equals the amount of water that's in it. And then on the right, you've got hay. So hay is 87.9% dry matter, which means that there's about 12% water there. So the dry matter of feed refers to the portion of the feed that remains after all moisture has been removed, which includes your carbohydrates, your protein, your fats, vitamins, and minerals. And an animal's intake in fresh weight will depend on the dry matter of that feed. So her dry matter intake for ruminants tends to be 2 to 3% of that animal's body weight. So when you want to know how much feed, to give that animal, we have to work it out in dry matter intake, because your fresh weight of your forage will vary so much. Yeah, and just quickly then on pasture can be 70 to 80% water. And why dry matter intake is also important is because if you can increase dry matter intake, you can support, if you're milking, an extra 2 to 2.5 kilograms of milk. And in beef cattle, dry matter intake will influence the weight gain and feed conversion efficiency. So it's basically all about getting your animal to eat as much as possible. So the energy requirements of cattle and the factors that might affect dry matter intake. So first of all is breed, but there's such a variation today in the weight within breeds that we have to look at weight as well. For example, your Welsh Blacks or your Aberdeen Angus's this way. If you go to the Royal Welsh, the Winter Fairshire, the Highland Show, the same. The cows there are absolutely huge. And then you've got the same breed then up on the hills, and they're much smaller. So it's really important to know the weight of your stock, or the average weight. And the bigger they are, the more their maintenance requirement is, the more they need to eat, the higher the dry matter intake will be. So if you're thinking about outwintering, the bigger the animal, the bigger stock reserves you need. Then we're thinking about the physiological state of that animal. So is she a growing heifer? Is she a heifer that's in calf? Is she a pregnant cow? Has she got a calf at foot? Is it just a barren cow, a steer, or bull? They all have different energy requirements. Animal health status. So an animal's overall health status, there's also a factor affecting dry matter intake, because if they've got a disease or a metabolic disorder, then the dry matter intake will be reduced when her energy requirement is actually higher. So when you've got, even if it's something like a worm burden or lice, they won't be eating as much as they should be eating. And then environmental conditions, so particularly temperature and humidity, so can significantly alter dry matter intake, but also that requirement of energy as well. Not an issue for outwintering, but heat stress obviously reduces dry matter intake, and water becomes extremely important. But talking about outwintering in this country, it's more about looking at weather extremes, and when we've got those not just cold winter spells, but when you've got like hail and it's wet and windy and cold, those are the worst weather really, and that's when their energy requirements will increase by about 20%, which we'll go over later on in another slide. Feed quality. So you might think you've fed the animals enough, but without actually knowing the quality of that feed, it's hard to know if you have or not. And poor quality with lower palatability will also affect dry matter intake. So they might have left some bale. If you've given some bales out, they may have left some, and you might think, oh, they must not be hungry, they haven't finished that bale. But actually that bale could have had mycotoxins or something, mold spores or anything that would have reduced the palatability of it. And yeah, management practices. So affected dry matter intake. So it's more of an issue with housed animals, making sure they've got enough feed fence space. But then when we were looking at outwintering cattle, for example, this photo here, I put a little bit of hay in the ground to get all 5 of them together to take a photo. But you know, I then put different piles out because what you don't want is them fighting over that one small pile of hay and one cow being bullied out. So it's ensuring, especially on a bigger mob with calves, that all animals have access to feed at one point. So quickly, energy requirement of sheep. So again, we're looking at different breeds. And I've got a slide further on that will, next slide, that's going to be looking at different breeds. Sorry. So this is a photo of mostly a Welsh mountain, and you will see on the left-hand side, that's actually a Romney cross. So she is bigger, she is heavier, she's a good 15 kilos heavier. So her energy requirement is a lot higher than the Welsh mountain. But this photo was actually taken after scanning last year. So I also know that ewe in the middle with the blue spot was expecting triplets. So obviously her requirements was higher. She was the only triplet we've got. We don't tend to have them. And the others in this group, they were either thin or expecting twins to a terminal sire. So they were grouped together because their energy requirements before lambing were higher than the rest of the herd. So I've got wool written down there. So I didn't have hair written on the cow slide. The reason why I put wool is when we select for rams, so we sell some breeding rams on and we breed our own rams as well. And obviously all our ewe lambs for replacements, wool is a big factor on our criteria because we don't lamb until April, but even then the chances of cold, sleet, rain is very high. So we need lambs to be born with good wool. They're born outside doors in the element. So yeah, good wool coverage is important so that they're on their feet, drinking colostrum as soon as possible. Animal physiological status, again, it's similar to the previous slide really, but with sheep the biggest difference is scanning percentage, that you're more likely to have more twins or multiples, whether you have a few more triplets on your farm compared to mine. So you're also looking at, are they replacement ewe lambs, breeding ewes, pregnant ewes, barren, stall lambs or rams. Then the environmental health, the animal health status, environmental condition, feed quality, and management practices are similar to what I explained in the previous slide. So looking at energy requirements of sheep. So I've listed a few breeds there that I would expect to be, lambing outdoors at the start. So whether you've got Herdwicks, we've got Welsh Mountain, improved Welsh Mountain, Scottish Blackface, Swaledale, Cheviots and Texels. So you might have one of those breeds or a similar breed, but the reason why I put it up is just to show the weights, the different weights. So the lighter your animal, basically, the lower the energy requirements and the easier it is to have them outdoors all year round without the need of any supplementary feed. What we do have to keep a close eye on is intakes, and to just be aware that when you start getting closer to lambing, their dry matter intake reduces. So you can see when you go from 8 weeks to 2 weeks pre-lambing there, the intakes dropped from 1.2 to 1.1. And then, drop based on the sheep's weight. And this is all because the lambs are taking up space within, the lamb's taking up space, so the rumen is being squashed, so she's not able to eat so much. And this is when we need to ensure that the grazing they have pre-lambing is good quality and higher in energy, because they won't be able to consume as much of it. And you can see once they've lambed how that intake jumps up. This is why we target lambing in April, so that 6 weeks post lambing, you're thinking it's, you know, it's May, mid-May, beginning of June, when grass growth, the grass is growing, so then the grass can supply that extra energy demand. So just as an idea for metabolizable energy, for megajoules per day that those ewes require. So I'm just looking here at a 55 kilo ewe. If she's expecting a single, 6 weeks pre-lambing is 9 megajoules per day. If she's expecting twins, that goes up to 10. And then the closer you get to lambing, the higher that requirement is. And that's important for the growth of the fetus, but also to produce good colostrum, which is extremely important in outdoor lambing systems. Yeah, my last point on sheep really is that it is a bit easier to quantify sheep needs compared to cattle, because they're not lactating over winter or when they need to get back in lamb either, because they've been weaned at the end of summer. So as a nutritionist, you know, it's always easier to formulate feed for sheep. They're either pregnant, lactating, or neither. Because of this, most of the next few slides will be looking at cattle. I might launch the first poll, Jamie, because if you could put on to see who's outwintered cattle, if that will come up.
So that should be on everyone's screen just now. Yep, there we go.
Can you see it? Oh,
can you see the results?
I can't see it.
Okay, I'll tell you. I'll let you know.
Yes, thank you.
Still populating just now. Oh, these are quick on the responses this afternoon. Grand. So still coming. Any more? Okay, so out of 80% of people who participated, 19% never have outwintered, 30% some are outwintered, and 52%, so over half of all the attendees this afternoon, are outwintering everything.
Oh wow, that's good to hear. Right, so next I'm going to go over calculating requirements of your cattle. So we've got just an example of 3 here. 700 kilo dairy cow, her maintenance will be 85 megajoules a day, compared to a 500 kilo beef, which is about 65, and a 400 kilo beef, which is less again at 55. When we're looking at milk production, for every litre of milk, they need an extra 5 megajoule per day. And then if we're thinking about these beef cattle that we've got outwintering, that will still have potentially a calf at foot in the beginning of winter, late autumn, how much milk are they producing? Which is really hard to quantify from a beef cow. It's quite easy to know how much a dairy cow's milk yield is. So if it is 4 litres, you know, that's an extra 20 megajoules. If you don't think your cows are giving that much, that's only 1 litre, that's an extra 5 megajoule per day of energy that she requires on top of her maintenance. I've got just on the right is the milk curve. Sorry. So the milk curve. So as you can see, when a cow calves, her milk yield then increases and then reduces over time. And that's how it works naturally. So the milk curve for your cattle will be different. You know, all of us will have different milk curves. And again, because of their beef, it's really hard to quantify. If you're a dairy farmer, a bit easier. So when you're looking at total requirements, all I've done there then is add the maintenance to the amount of milk that cow's produced. And I've just quickly compared a 500 kilo to a 400 kilo animal then. The difference is 10 megajoules per day, which you might not think is a lot in one day, but over a winter period, whether you count it as 4, 5, 6 months, and you add that up, then it's quite significant the amount of extra energy that's required, because that energy will have to come from somewhere, whether there's hay that you've conserved, silage you've conserved, or forage grass that you've deferred. It needs to be somewhere, it needs to be stored. So a 400 kilo animal has a dry matter intake, say, of 3% body weight for the talk today. So to know how much she will eat, you can go 400 times 3%, which will give you 12 kilos of dry matter a day. She's actually unable really to consume much more than that. So if you've got a lot of poor quality forage in front of them, and they reach that 12 kilos of dry matter a day, they might not actually reach the amount of energy they need, but they physically cannot eat anymore. Earlier, I showed an analysis. So the ME of the hay on that slide was 8.1. So for the exercise today, I will use that one. So it was 8.1 megajoules per day. So if the animal is able to eat 12 kilos dry matter of that hay, which is 8.1, you just multiply it together, which gives her 97.2 megajoules per day. We worked out earlier that her requirement was 75, so it's great. You know, we've got surplus of 22.2 megajoules a day. So she is having plenty of feed. It's all going good, and she's probably might be either putting a bit of weight on, or she's producing more milk than we think. But we're outwintering these cattle, so we are going to have difficulties, and one of these is extreme weather. So we did have a snowfall in December just been. So any cow you had with a calf-calf foot, you would then need to add an extra 15% on, which then gives us an extra 10.95 megajoules per day. So in excess of energy. So also great. But looking at the photo there, you can already see when we say no bar, no problem. But when the quad bike is refusing to go up the field, that is a little bit of a problem. So we were putting little bales on sledges and walking up the mountain to get to the cattle. Which my son enjoyed, because he then gets the sledge down. But you know, problem solving for next year, we've got a sheep pen up here, and we could easily store some bales there. So next year we'll probably have the cattle on this piece of ground again over Christmas, but we will have some backup, say silage or haylage, wrapped up there, ready to go, so that we don't face this problem again. And then, when I've just got written there, the top corner, extreme weather conditions, lower critical temperature. So on a cold day, it can be as low as -14. So these cattle are actually really happy on this day. Yes, there's a lot of snow, and they had to forage about to get to the grass, but it was actually cold and relatively nice. But if it was a wet and windy day, they actually use more energy, even at temperatures of like 14 degrees. Not temperatures of 14 degrees, sorry. It's when they'll need to start using more energy. But as you can see here, we've got quite a bit of shelter, so they can always go and stand in a shelter so that they are sheltered from the elements. I have just put a little note down on if you're calving down at 2 years old, which a lot of people are pushing for. You also need to consider that extra energy requirements for the heifer that is growing a calf, but also growing herself, and how much energy she needs. So if you're expecting her to gain 500 grams a day, that's an extra 35 megajoules. So you can already see there that it's a different cow. So her dry matter intake and everything will be lower, and her requirements will be a bit lower than that cow that I've got above her. But when you're adding 35 megajoules a day, it's quite easily to be in a deficit of energy. And it's okay if you're okay with a lower daily live weight gain. If you're only needing her to gain 100 grams a day, then obviously that extra energy she requires is lower. So it's hard for me to quantify everything on these slides to suit everyone's farm because you will all have different needs. So I'll just quickly go over late gestation as well, because I think, actually, shall we put another poll up on calving dates, please, Jamie?
Okay, that should be there. I think I can actually share the results by hitting another button. So see how that works at the end of this one.
I've got two tabs open, so maybe that's the problem.
Maybe.
It's on the other tab.
We're getting there. I'm assuming some people aren't answering because they don't have cows, and the question's titled "Calving Day."
Yeah.
There might be some sheep shepherds amongst us.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'll hit share results.
I don't think anyone will be lambing all year round.
Yeah, correct. I've had verification of that in the chat. Right, I've hit share results. Can everyone see that?
I can't, so you should
Okay,
just
that's
read it
fine.
out to me.
So 73% of people are calving April and May, and 27% of people are calving other. I'm assuming that means autumn.
Okay. Right, it will be very different to autumn calvers. But yes, I thought I'd just ask, because when I'm talking here about late gestation, I'm thinking they're going to be in late gestation in February, March time to calve down in April, May time. So the energy requirements will, we need to add an extra 20%. So that's what I've done there. So, and you're also likely to experience extreme weather. Again, in February, March, we've had plenty of snow and horrible wet rain in February and March. So it's been able to add that 20% plus that 15%. So, that's an extra 35% of energy those animals will require. But I have weaned the calves off here, so that's why it's a bit not that much higher than the previous slide. And just reiterating the note on calving down at 2 years old and how really important it is to look after those heifers. So far, it's so good, right? It's quite simple. You've got that forage, it analyzes as this, you've got this amount of energy, the cows requires that, right? Simple, let's go. But we all know that computer says one thing, what's actually happening on farm is very, very different. So this is why you can't really ask ChatGPT to tell you how to feed the animals, and why you've got to go out and look at your stock. So I put this photo here. Yes, I'm a nutritionist, and then there I am giving the cows some haylage with mold in it, but it is what it is. And unfortunately, we had some spoilage on a certain bale. And it's just important then, I've spotted it. Yeah, it's quite easy to take the mold spores out that's visible, but you can't actually see all the mycotoxins. So as I mentioned earlier, if these cattle don't finish this bale by the following day, but they usually do, it's important to still give them another bale because it's probably been spoiled. And one good indicator is to just look at their rumen fills. So if you look at the left-hand side, I should have put a photo up, and you'll be able to see the rumen. If it's full, they'll have a nice round belly. If it's not, it will really dip in. So if you've ever had a really sick animal that's her dry matter intake is really low, then you'll really see that dip in her rumen fill. Another indicator is a cow just standing, doing nothing. So when you look at your stock, they're either drinking, eating, socializing, ruminating, lying down. But if they're just standing there just a little bit, not even hurt, well, they could be, if they're hunched as well, that's a big sign. And they're just unhappy, then that's another sign that they're obviously not eating and they're not themselves. So they're probably, again, at risk of not reaching their maintenance energy requirement. I might Could you put the poll up to see if anyone's analysed their forage, please, Jamie?
Okay, so that's up.
I think that's the last one, so I can stop asking people then.
Oh, very, very controversial.
Oh.
I would just like to point out that I also don't analyse my forage, folks. So I'm not judging anyone. So out of so 22% have analysed their forage, 78% haven't analysed their forage. So that's a resounding majority.
Yeah, that's fair enough. If you don't know why to analyze it or don't know how to read the analysis, then why would you analyze it? But hopefully, after listening to this talk, you might think, "Oh, I'm going to get my forage analysed." Um, so, knowing your forage analysis, you'll know the energy content, you'll know the protein content, but also if it's quite poor, it gives you the opportunity to better it for next year. So if you actually don't know how good of a quality you've made this year, then you don't do any changes, it's just going to be as poor the following year. So it's about knowing where you stand. And I have got misspelt silage there to soilage, but you do not want to make soilage because having soil in your silage will just lead to listeria. So I'll have to change that back to silage. And yeah, it's having the right grass species as as well. So you want if you are outwintering, I think I'm coming on next actually to more deferred grazing, but it's about having that right grass species that can endure with frost and snow. So just to be flexible and be ready to change if required. Yeah, so winter pasture stockpiling or deferred grazing. Not sure how many of you already do this or if you've just been feeding hay/silage outside. So instead of grazing pastures through late summer and autumn, we allow that land to rest. And as the air cools, grasses shift from fast growth to energy storage, preparing themselves for dormant season. And frost actually becomes like a natural preservative. So you can think it preserves the grass for later on. So instead of decaying, grasses can actually hold their structure and they can keep the sugars and nutrients locked inside. And then by the winter, that field then that's rested kind of becomes nature's own haystack, like created without the need of a tractor, without feed, without labour. So you've saved a lot of cost by being able to save some pasture to graze later on. It does need a lot of planning, so you can't just go, oh, I'm just going to shut that off now, or I think I'll do that. Now is actually the perfect time to think about next winter and to decide which fields to close off and when. I've said there, shut fields off late August, early September, but it's all depending on your own farm. Some farms will have grass growth further on in the season, so you might get away with shutting the fields off later on, or you might have to shut them off in July, depending how well your grass grows in September. So the goal before shutting them off is to make sure that you have, grazed the top of the plant off to make sure that they do regrow in autumn. And what's quite interesting is that the protein levels actually remain quite respectable on these pastures that might look like they're a bit old. And the energy actually stays quite stable as well. And when you've analysed it against hay, sometimes it analyses better than quite good hay, which shows that the energy is kind of like locked up. And, you might think, oh yeah, it looks a little bit dead, it looks a little bit brown. But when you compare it to the colour of silage and hay, it's still pretty green. And that's what our mentality needs to change, really, in that it is still a little bit green. There's still quite a bit of energy in there. And because you've got the sugars, it becomes very palatable as well, which encourages dry matter intake, which is what we need over winter. And then you might ask, what do we do with the animal? So if you've closed off certain fields in August, September, or then October, November. You don't want to come back to them really until December, January. Where do we graze instead? You graze your other pastures, but when it becomes, once the growing season slows down, end September, October here, you can actually graze that pasture down lower than you would have in spring, because that grass isn't going to regrow. So you don't have to worry about needing the leaves for photosynthesis, because that's it, it's done. It's not going to grow until spring again, where it will have new shoots anyway. So what you do need to do is leave enough coverage to protect the soil through winter. And yeah, avoid poaching. It's all about managing the grass then for poaching. So winter pastures, other considerations. So yeah, I've already mentioned a little bit about assessing your farm resources. You sit down now to plan for next winter. And it's about choosing suitable sites as well. There needs to be shelter so that they can shelter away from wind and rain, because if they're standing out in the elements, their energy requirements will shoot up. So you want to try and keep that maintenance energy requirements as low as possible. Water, they need access to water. And if you think it's going to freeze, pipes are going to freeze, that you can then carry water to them one way or another. We're lucky that we've got enough streams, and streams don't freeze, so water hasn't been an issue to us. Then I've got safe there. So what do I mean by safe? You don't want them slipping off the side of a cliff, but also we've got quite a few pastures with a lot of oak trees, and we cannot graze these fields in September, October time. So then they become the fields we could graze in January, because naturally we'd shut them off them anyway. It does mean that we can never graze them in autumn, so they'll always be kind of the winter pastures. And then, yeah, quality of forage and how to improve. So if you have analysed your forage, then you'll know if you can improve it or not. And this is all about then managing your soil and grazing management over the summer, really. And then avoid poaching. So when I'm talking about quality of forage, we're talking about being able to increase the protein level and the metabolizable energy in there. And you might want to incorporate different plant species as well. So how to improve livestock energy efficiency. So I've already spoken a bit about, the breed, mature weight. The heavier she is, the more energy it requires. For example, earlier we spoke about how an extra 100 kilogram live weight equates to about an extra 10 megajoules per day. So yeah, we used to have a herd of Aberdeen Angus's, black limousines. They would be out of the mountain in the summer. They would be in the shed then. Sorry, losing my voice. They'll be in the shed from October, November time up until the end of April, really. They were big animals. They would more likely to poach over the winter. So we've done the big move to these little blue greys, which are a lot smaller. And because their requirements is so much lower over winter, they can hack it out up on the mountain in November. You need to monitor body condition score, because any cow that's looking thin will require extra energy to put weight on. So it takes more energy to put weight on than it does to lose it. And any cow, you could, here you can think about your sheep as well. Sorry, that any sheep or cow that loses condition, then she might not be the right one for your system. So any of our thin ewes, we now scan their ear tags, they'll go to terminal sire, and we make sure we breed that line out. Mating are 55% of mature body weight. So it's very easy to try and target calving down at 2 years old. But unless that heifer has grown to a good enough size, then you should question whether you should mate her at all. And the same with sheep. If anyone's lambing ewe lambs, we don't, but you do get the occasion one. Sometimes that hasn't come down off the mountain at weaning time. She comes in at scanning, and she might scan in lamb. Weaning time. So I've got weaning time scale and breeding to align with feed availability. So I did ask if some of you are autumn calving, which does put a little bit of pressure if it is autumn calving when you click the other, because the peak milk yield of those cattle will then be in peak winter. Whereas if you calve down in the spring, 6 weeks post calving, when that lactation curve goes up, whether she's producing the most milk will align with grass growth. And yeah, same can be said with lambing. Obviously, a lambing is more likely to be, well, if you're indoor, lambing from January, or outdoors potentially from March. But I think quite a few people are pushing lambing back a little bit now. We start lambing the 1st of April, but I know quite a few around us have already pushed it back to the 10th of April. And that's, again, just to align that 6 weeks post lambing extra milk requirement with grass growth. Group animals with those with similar energy demand. So with ewes, you can group them, twins, triplets together, whether thin ewes or your singles. And then the same with cattle. If you've got a heifer that's going to be calming down at 2 years old that has higher energy requirements, group her with whether you've got a couple of thin ewes that need a bit more energy, or if there's a cow with a calf at foot, maybe she calved later on, for example, group them together. And again, if you have analysed your forage, you might know which hay is better than the others, and you'd give your better hay to those, or maybe you supplement them with hay and deferred grazing, whereas your cattle who are handling the system a bit better would be okay on just deferred grazing. So some of the benefits of outwintering, to start with, obviously you've got the manure and residual forage that stays on the pasture in the winter, so then it fertilizes it. So a lot of our farm, you cannot access it with a tractor. So there's no chance of, if you had cows in a barn, in a shed, there's no chance you'd get them the farm-fed manure back out there. So, you're fertilizing the soil all year round, which is great. You can avoid pathogen buildups. So, stay out in the fresh air. There's nothing beats it, really. Space, animals grow in space. I've coming from working a lot with some big dairy herds. You find like pneumonia, big issue in these sheds with calves. And you might think, oh, but they're outside in the cold. Would that not be a bigger issue with outwintering? But it's not. As long as they're getting the energy required, their immune system's working well, then there's not many issues in terms of health that you need to be worried about. Stockpiled forage often surpasses good hay for nutritional value. I think I mentioned that earlier. And then in this photo here, targeted trampling. So we're chucking hay on top of bracken in the hope to break up the roots. We've got huge bracken issues, and because of bracken, we then got a lot of tick issues. So we are really trying now to do something about it. And this is our first winter doing this, so we will be monitoring it over the next few years and hoping to see an improvement. If anyone on this call has managed to improve pasture and reduce bracken, then please let me know. So to conclude, there are some distinct advantages to outwintering cattle, but good planning is required. Energy requirements can vary significantly between farms, between cows. So every farm is unique, and the right animal for your farm is the one that performs best on your forage. So what works on my farm is different to what works in yours. But it's definitely possible to outwinter and get some good growth in your cattle. So thank you. I think we've got 10 minutes to go, Jamie.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Bethan. I'll send you some photos on bracken trampling with cattle that I've got when I was up at Rockmell in Pasture, because they're really cool.
Yes, please.
So we've got a bit of time for questions and further discussion. There's one question from Harriet on cows eating oak saplings. Harriet, do you want to kind of unmute yourself and kind of ask that question? I'm not really sure what it's in reference to. Don't know if Harriet can hear me. What I'll do is there's a further poll just on feedback from today's session and kind of what everyone's getting out of it. I'm just going to launch that just now. So if everyone could just sort of take a couple minutes just to answer those questions, I would really appreciate it. It all feeds back into this program and things we may deliver on it later in the year. It won't take long, I promise. What I might do actually is if someone's in the chat just asked more about trampling bracken with cattle, I'll actually just attach some photos in the follow-up email on some impacts that we did there.
Yep.
Grand. I suppose.
Have you gone back to see it after the impact?
I haven't been. Well, I've not been
No.
back for a couple of years, but I remember it was basically a case of like the bracken was like above my head. It was over 6 feet tall, you know, and just chucking what a couple. It'd be 140 cows with calves in the summertime.
Okay.
Obviously not outwintering, but chucking 140 cows and calves with bale supplement and mobile water troughs on top of bracken beds, just reduced it all the way down to just powder. And then I think 6 weeks afterwards, we actually had grass shoots coming under about that long, which was amazing. And I think my follow-up recommendation would be to then do like really light grazing with sheep to sort of encourage the grass to tiller. But never quite got to that stage because we were really busy and we didn't have sheep nearby we could do. But I've also done it in winter with cattle on bracken. And I suppose it would be similar, but I think someone said to me once, if you want to do that with bracken, you've got to hit it at 3 growth stages within 2 years.
Okay.
So hit it like short as it's emerging, just as the fronds are coming out, and then also when it's super, super long, either senesced or still growing. But I think that's the strategy anyway. And over time, you can't completely get rid of the bracken, but you can let it compete with the grass that comes up underneath it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like when you're farming bracken, it's like, oh, this needs to change.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the way of it. You'll never completely get rid of it, but you can challenge it slightly. But it's a total smashing bracken with cattle is highly addictive. I do not recommend it. A couple of thanks to everyone who's answered the poll as is. If anyone just hasn't yet, if you just got a few minutes, that'd be awesome. Any other questions now while we're just wrapping up? If anything springs to mind as well while you're cooking your tea or you're on your drive home, then just fire it over in the email, in the response email, and I'll put it to Beth and we can get an answer.